The Eyes of the Sphinx, the newest evidence of extraterrestrial contact in ancient Egypt. By Erich von Daniken. Narrated by Danny Campbell. Copyright 1996 by Erich von Daniken. This unabridged audiobook is published by arrangement with John W. White Literary Agency and was produced in the year 2011 by Tantor Media, Incorporated, which holds the copyright thereto. Keep listening after The Eyes of the Sphinx for a bonus interview with author Erich von Daniken. 1. Pet Cemeteries and Empty Tombs. O Egypt, Egypt! Your knowledge will survive but in legends, which later generations will be unable to believe. Lucius Appuleius, Roman philosopher, 2nd century A.D. Welcome to Egypt! A lanky young man with a black mustache stepped in my way and extended his hand in greeting. Somewhat surprised, I grabbed it, thinking to myself that this had to be the newest way to welcome tourists to the country. Immediately I was subjected to the typical questioning. Where was I from, and what did I intend to visit in Egypt? Jovially, though somewhat awkwardly, I got rid of this pushy fellow, but not for long. I had barely left the confines of the Cairo airport building when I was confronted by another one just like him. Welcome to Egypt! My suitcases, please. More semi-voluntary handshaking. In the days that followed, the same bothersome treatment repeated itself numerous times. "Welcome to Egypt!" rang from the steps of the Egyptian Antiquities Museum in Cairo. "Welcome to Egypt!" proclaimed the papyrus seller. "Welcome to Egypt!" from the shoeshine boy at the street corner, the taxi driver, the hotel receptionist, and the clerk at the souvenir store. Everyone wanted to know what country I was from, and I was getting tired of answering the same question over and over. Having my hand shaken and my origins inquired after for the 42nd time in front of the step pyramid of Saqqara, I answered solemnly, "I am from Mars." Undaunted by my reply, the man grabbed both of my hands and declared emphatically once more, "Welcome to Egypt!" That's how far the Egyptians have come. Even tourists from Mars don't seem to be anything new. I have traveled to this country on the Nile many times in my 60 years. Many things have changed: the streets, the transportation, the polluted air, the new hotel complexes. But a shroud of mystery continues to linger over it. It still generates the same reverent fascination for which Egypt has always been known. Back in 1954, as a 19-year-old, I first descended into the subterranean tunnels under the desert sand of Saqqara. An Egyptian friend and 2 guards led the way. Each of us carried burning candles because 40 years ago the stuffy vaults were without electricity. The tunnels had not yet been opened to tourists. I remember very clearly how one of the guards raised his candle to highlight a massive, man-sized sarcophagus. The trembling flame reflected weakly off the granite block. "What's in it?" I asked hesitantly. "Sacred bulls, young man. Mummified bulls." A few feet away was another wide recess in the vault with another bull sarcophagus, and yet another one across from it. Giant sarcophaguses lined the musty vaults as far as the candlelight could reach. A thick carpet of dust muffled our steps like plush velvet. More corridors, more recesses, more sarcophaguses. It felt rather spooky. The microscopic dust was irritating my throat. There was no breeze to circulate the stale, heavy air. All the coffins had been opened. The massive granite covers had been pushed aside slightly. I was eager to see one of the mummies, and asked my friend and the 2 guards for assistance. They raised me up until I could lie flat on the upper edge of one of the sarcophaguses. With my candle I lit the inside of the coffin. It was squeaky clean and empty. I tried 4 more, with the same result. Where were the mummified bulls? Had the huge animal corpses been removed? Were these sacred mummies now in museums? Vaguely, the suspicion arose in me that the sarcophaguses might never have held any mummified bulls. Now, over 40 years later, I was once again visiting the underground vaults. Electric lights have been installed. Tourists are channeled through 2 parallel hallways. Many of the tourists gasp in awe as the travel guide explains knowingly that each of the huge sarcophaguses used to house the mummy of a sacred Apis bull. I don't feel like contradicting the guide, even though I know better now. No mummies of sacred bulls have ever been found in the giant granite sarcophaguses. It started with Auguste Mariette. Paris, 1850. 28-year-old Auguste Mariette was employed as a science assistant at the Louvre. A short, lively man who could curse like a drunken sailor, he had accumulated a wealth of knowledge about Egypt in the past 7 years. He was fluent in English, French, and Arabic, was proficient at deciphering hieroglyphs, and was busy at work translating ancient Egyptian texts. The French had heard that the British, their fiercest archaeological rivals, were buying ancient texts in Egypt. Naturally, the French, in their grand tradition, could not allow themselves to be left behind. The Academy of Sciences in Paris decided to dispatch science assistant Auguste Mariette to Egypt. With 6,000 francs in his pockets, he was supposed to snatch the best papyri from the British. Auguste Mariette arrived in Cairo on August 2, 1850. The very next day he paid a visit to the Coptic Patriarchate, hoping to secure some ancient Egyptian papyrus texts from Coptic monasteries. While strolling through the antique shops of Cairo, he noticed that every store was selling genuine sphinxes, all of them originally from Saqqara. This started Mariette thinking. When the Coptic Patriarchate informed him on October 17th that more time was needed to decide the fate of the ancient papyri, Mariette was disappointed. He climbed to the top of the citadel, where he sat on the steps for a long time, pondering his options. Below him, Cairo was shrouded in an early evening mist. Mariette wrote that 300 minarets protruded from the dense sea of fog like the masts of a sunken fleet. In the west he saw the pyramids bathed in the golden flame dust of the setting sun. It was an overwhelming sight. Mariette described how captivated he was, mesmerized by an almost painful fascination. It was the fulfillment of his lifelong dream. Over there, virtually within reach, lay an entire world of tombs, monuments, inscriptions, and statues. What else was there? The next day he rented 2 or 3 mules for his luggage and a donkey or 2 for himself. He bought a tent and a few cases of provisions suitable for desert travel, and on October 20th, 1850, he set up his tent at the foot of the Great Pyramid. 7 days later, Mariette, impatient by nature, was fed up with the hustle and bustle around the pyramids. He moved his small caravan half a day's journey south and set up camp in Saqqara among ruins and toppled pillars. Saqqara's modern-day trademark, the step pyramid dedicated to the pharaoh Djoser, 2630 to 2611 B.C., was still hidden beneath the desert sands. Idleness was not in Auguste Mariette's character. While exploring the surroundings, he discovered the head of a sphinx protruding from the sand. Immediately he remembered the sphinxes in the antique stores, which came from Saqqara. A few feet away he stumbled across a broken stone tablet, from which he deciphered the word Apis. That was enough to jolt the attention of the young man from Paris. Other visitors before Auguste Mariette had seen the sphinx head and the stone tablet, but nobody had made the connection. Mariette recalled the works of ancient writers like Herodotus, around 490 to 425 B.C., Diodorus Siculus, and Strabo, all of whom had described a mysterious Apis cult in ancient Egypt. In the first chapter of his geography, Strabo, 63 BC to AD 26, wrote that Memphis itself, the royal residence of the Egyptians, is also near Babylon, for the distance to it from the delta is only 3 shoni. It contains temples, one of which is that of Apis, who is the same as Osiris. It is here that the bull Apis is kept in a kind of sanctuary, being regarded, as I have said, as God, etc. There is also a serapeum at Memphis, in a place so very sandy that dunes of sand are heaped up by the winds. And by these some of the sphinxes which I saw were buried even to the head, and others were only half visible. Can you believe it? Partially buried sphinxes, Memphis, the Apis bull, and the Serapis temple? Mariette was in the right place. In the 40-volume historical library authored by Diodorus Siculus, who lived in the 1st century B.C., Mariette had read about the sacred bull called Apis and its lavish burial. A lavish burial? So far, no one had found burial sites for bulls in Egypt. Auguste Mariette forgot all about the mission with which he had been entrusted by his French colleagues. He forgot about the Coptic Patriarchate and the papyri which he was supposed to copy. He had his own mission. Without hesitation, he hired 30 workers and ordered them to shovel away the sand from the small dunes that were protruding from the desert at short intervals. Auguste Mariette uncovered a large number of sphinxes, one of them about every 6 meters. An entire parade of 134 statues was unearthed. Strabo had been right after all. Among the ruins of a small temple, Mariette found some stone tablets with pictures and inscriptions. They depicted Pharaoh Nectanebo II, 360 to 342 BC, dedicating the temple to the god Apis. Mariette was certain that the tombs of the lavishly buried Apis bulls had to be nearby. The following weeks were occupied by a feverish search. Mariette made a wealth of discoveries. From the desert sands he retrieved likenesses of falcons, gods, and panthers. In a chapel of some sort he unearthed the limestone statue of an Apis bull. The bull's sculpture triggered some unexpected reactions among the women of the neighboring villages. During a lunch break, Mariette observed 15 girls and women taking turns on top of the bull. They positioned themselves on the bull's back and began moving their stomachs and thighs rhythmically against the statue. These exercises, Mariette was told, were a panacea against infertility. In his search for the entrance to the bull tombs, Mariette discovered hundreds of small figurines and amulets. Rumors started to circulate in Cairo that the nervous French archaeologist was stealing golden statues. Egyptian government soldiers on camels rode into camp to bar Mariette from further excavations. Mariette swore, cursed, and negotiated. His bosses in Paris, delighted by the reports and treasures they received from Mariette, sent him another 30,000 francs and intervened diplomatically on his behalf with the Egyptian government. On June 30th, 1851, Mariette was granted permission to continue his work. Impatiently, he resorted to using dynamite so that he could listen to the sound waves reflected off the ground during the explosion. Where are the mummified bulls? On November 12, 1851, a large rock gave way under the weight of Mariette's feet. As if on an escalator, he slowly slid down into an underground vault. After the dust had settled and some torches had been lowered into the chamber, Mariette found himself in front of a recess in the wall which contained a gigantic sarcophagus. He did not doubt for a second that he had accomplished his goal. The sarcophagus was certain to harbor one of the sacred Apis bulls. As he moved closer to light the niche with his torch, he saw the huge coverstone of the sarcophagus. It had been forced out of its original position. The sarcophagus was empty. In the weeks that followed, Mariette examined the mysterious vaults methodically. The main vault was close to 300 meters long, about 8 meters high, and 3 meters wide. Large chambers branched off on both sides. Each contained a granite sarcophagus, solidly anchored at the base. A second vault, as large as the first, was opened. The 12 sarcophaguses found here had the same oversized dimensions as the 12 discovered in the first vault. These are the dimensions of a sarcophagus. Length equals 3.79 meters. Width equals 2.3 meters. Height equals 2.4 meters without the cover. Width of the sarcophagus wall equals 0.42 meters. Mariette estimated the weight of each sarcophagus at roughly 70 tons, with an additional 20 or 25 tons for the cover stone. Humongous. All the cover stones had either been partially moved aside or pushed from the sarcophagus altogether. Not a trace anywhere of the lavishly buried sacred bull mummies. Mariette assumed that grave robbers or monks from the nearby St. Jeremiah monastery had beaten them to the sepulchres. Bitter and infuriated, he continued digging. More vaults were forced open. They contained wooden sarcophaguses from the 19th dynasty, 1307 to 1196 B.C. When a large boulder threatened to halt his progress, Mariette once more resorted to dynamite. The explosive ripped a huge hole in the ground, and in the light of their torches the men beheld a giant wooden sarcophagus below. The explosion had shattered its cover. Once the debris was removed, Mariette encountered the remains of a mummified man. According to Mariette, the mummy's face was covered by a gold mask. Around his neck he wore a gold chain with a small column made of green feldspar and red jasper. Another chain featured 2 jasper amulets inscribed with the name of Prince Kamwisi, who was one of the sons of Ramses II. 18 statues with human heads were scattered nearby, all with the inscription, Osiris Apis, Great God, Lord of Eternity. But it was not until the 1930s that this mummy, which Mariette assumed to be the remains of a prince, was scientifically examined. When British Egyptologists Sir Robert Mond and Dr. Oliver Myers cut apart the bandages, they were engulfed by the nauseating smell of bitumen, or asphalt. The formless mass was riddled with tiny bone fragments. Where were the sacred bulls? During the summer of 1852, Mariette discovered additional Apis sarcophaguses in a new vault. The oldest among them were dated around 1500 B.C. None of them contained mummified bulls. Finally, it was on September 5, 1852, Mariette encountered 2 sarcophaguses that had not been tampered with. The dust on the ground revealed the footprints of the priests who had carried the sacred bulls to their tombs 3,500 years earlier. A gold-plated statue of Osiris was standing guard over the niche. The floor was covered with gold tiles which had peeled off the ceiling over the course of time. On the ceiling, Mariette recognized depictions of Ramses II, 1290 to 1224 B.C., and his son offering a sacred potion to the god Apis Osiris, presented in this case as an amalgam of both. With great difficulty the lid was hoisted off the sarcophagus with crowbars and winches. Auguste Mariette wanted to make certain that he would indeed find an Apis mummy, and therefore used extra caution. His first concern was for the head of the bull, but he found none. The sarcophagus contained a foul-smelling bituminous mass which disintegrated under the slightest pressure. This mass was permeated with a large number of tiny bones, which apparently had been fragmented at the time of burial. Amidst the array of random bone fragments, Mariette was fortunate to find 15 small figurines. The same disenchanting experience repeated itself with the second sarcophagus. No skulls of bulls, no large bones. On the contrary, he found even more tiny bone fragments. The vaults beneath the sands of Saqqara never yielded any sacred Apis bulls, contrary to everything the tourists are told, and contrary to most of the pertinent scientific literature. Today, the vaults are called the Serapeum, a Greek synthesis of the words Osir and Apis serapis. Auguste Mariette, the restless searcher who fought many battles with the Egyptian authorities, returned to Egypt after a brief trip to Paris. He had grown unaccustomed to the stuffy museum air at home. In 1858, the Egyptian government appointed him chief supervisor of all historical excavations in Egypt, based on the recommendation of Ferdinand de Lesseps, the builder of the Suez Canal. The energetic Frenchman threw himself into his work. Under his supervision, excavations were going on at 40 different locations simultaneously, involving up to 2,700 workers. Mariette was the first Egyptologist to create a detailed catalogue of all his findings. He founded the world-renowned Egyptian Antiquities Museum, and in 1879 was awarded the title of Pasha. The libretto to the opera Aida, which Giuseppe Verdi composed for the opening of the Suez Canal, honors Auguste Mariette. Unknowingly, thousands of tourists pass his grave every day. His sarcophagus is located in front of the Egyptian Antiquities Museum in Cairo. Sarcophaguses with fake mummies. In the eyes of conservative archaeologists, there is little doubt that the giant sarcophaguses at the Serapeum at one time housed the mummies of sacred bulls. An expert recently hissed at me, "What else should have been in them? Nuclear waste?" I doubt that, dear gentlemen, but the solution to the mystery might come from totally unexpected corners. In order to track down the perpetrator with ironclad detective work, I first have to present some curious facts. In addition to the sacred Apis, the Egyptians worshipped two other less well-known bulls named Mnevis and Bacchus. Strabo mentions the city of Heliopolis, which is situated upon a noteworthy mound. It contains the temple of Helios and the ox Mnevis, which is kept in a kind of sanctuary and is regarded among the inhabitants as god, as is Apis in Memphis. Mnevis was a bull without markings, but with black tufts of hair that were brushed the wrong way. A letter written by one of the temple priests at Heliopolis describes the actual mummification of the Mnevis bull. The priest was confirming the receipt of 20 arm lengths of fine linen to wrap Mnevis. Excavations at Heliopolis, the city of the sun god Atum-Re, indeed revealed sepulchres of Mnevis bulls. All of them had been destroyed, robbed, and pillaged. Up to this day, not one of the Mnevis tombs has been found intact. The Bacchus bull was worshipped in central Egypt, not far from the modern-day city of Luxor. As is often the case in archaeology, the Bacchus catacombs were discovered by accident. The British archaeologist Sir Robert Mond had heard that a bronze statue of a bull had been uncovered near the small town of Armant. This small town is identical to the former temple city of Hermonthis, which in ancient Egypt was also called the southern On, as opposed to the northern On, namely Heliopolis. Sir Robert Mond calculated that there may well have been a bull-worshipping cult in the southern On, just as there had been in its northern counterpart. The bronze statue confirmed his suspicions. He launched a methodical search. Like Auguste Mariette with his discoveries at Saqqara, the British team unearthed huge sarcophaguses in subterranean vaults located beneath the dilapidated temple ruins of Hermonthis. The sarcophaguses at Hermonthis were similar to those at Serapeum, in that they were built into niches on both sides of the main entrance. In consideration of the fact that the whole structure, containing 35 niches, was dedicated to the Buckus bulls, it was named Buckium. Not far from it, Sir Robert discovered a second set of vaults, which was named Beccaria. Both structures were in extremely poor condition. Once more, grave robbers had beaten the archaeologists to the loot. Moreover, some of the chambers were partially submerged in water, and the mummies presumably had been eaten up by millions of white ants. The bronze statues that were found were totally corroded. Artifacts made of iron had been atomized. Sir Robert Mond reported that the most well-preserved body they found at the very end was that of Beccaria 32. The mummy was handled with extreme caution, and every detail was recorded. The position of the mummy did not indicate a resting bull, but rather a jackal or a dog. No bones had been broken. All of this sounds strange and confusing. The existence of the sarcophaguses is the only fact that can be ascertained. They were found at the Serapeum, in vaults below Heliopolis, at the Buckium, in Beccaria, and also in Abu Sur, near Giza. The sarcophaguses were either empty or contained a foul-smelling bituminous mass filled with tiny bone fragments. Even more confusing is the fact that a human mummy with a gold mask was found instead of the anticipated sacred bulls. Much later we learn that the bandages did not cover a human corpse either, but once more concealed a malodorous asphalt mass. And finally, the mummies, which supposedly were bulls, in reality turn out to be jackals or dogs. Unanswered questions abound. British archaeologists Mond and Myers had some of their artifacts from the Buckium and from Beccaria chemically analyzed. One piece of white glass contained 26.6% aluminum oxide, a value far too high for ordinary glass. An artificial eye made of clay contained an excessive amount of calcium, and the white of the eye, which had been assumed to be faience, turned out to be neither Egyptian faience nor glass. In contrast to genuine faience, Egyptian faience consisted of a fine quartz sand with a glass glaze. The Egyptians used it to make jewelry, most notably beads. The coverless bull sarcophaguses were made from a single block of Aswan granite. Aswan is located approximately 600 miles from the Serapeum. The mining, polishing, and transportation of even a single sarcophagus weighing 90 to 100 tons, including the lid, would have been a superhuman feat. Moreover, these monstrously heavy and bulky coffins had to be pushed, pulled, or rolled to the prepared vault and anchored into the wall recesses. Such accomplishments in terms of organization and technology underline the degree of importance in which the Egyptians conferred upon the contents of the sarcophagus. But lo and behold, the priests would cut up and virtually pulverize the recently mummified bulls into tiny bone fragments, mix them up with a large sticky blob of bitumen or asphalt, stir in some religious statues and amulets, hoist the smelly concoction into a splendid sarcophagus, and put on the lid. Just like that. If this had been the scenario, the ancient Egyptians certainly could have saved themselves the trouble of making and transporting the gigantic sarcophaguses. There was no need for colossal granite coffins to preserve some bone fragments without heads or horns for several centuries. Furthermore, the experts agree that the ancient Egyptian priests would have never dissected one of the sacred bulls. It would have been blasphemy. Sir Robert Mond indicates that it was inconceivable in ancient Egypt for a mummy to be buried in any form that would not have left his physical body intact. Nevertheless, it appears that this happened time and time again. The underground structures near Abu Sur yielded two splendidly embalmed bulls. The linen bandages crisscrossing the entire body were tied down with strings and were unsevered. Hopes were high that finally 2 well-preserved mummies of sacred...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?